Right. So this is class number 2, where you are going to learn more about pollutants, how to sample them, and how to use those informations for future management effort. Um, just one announcement: homework 1 will be out today, and it's going to be due next Thursday by midnight by Gradescope. So you'll work on your own piece of papers and scan them and upload them. This is also another due dates about forming a group. What we'll do is, I know that somebody posted a link for GroupMe. If you can post the same link on CampusWare so that other people can start using it, so that they can find their team members. But if you didn't find any members by next Tuesday, send me an email so that I'll put you on the groups. So your goal is to find a group by next Tuesday, and also start brainstorming about different type of green infrastructures that you can use. Again, you don't have to decide your project topic. We'll help you on that, but at least I want you to read about it so that you can make an informed decision when there is a need. So these are the different steps. As I see, a different percentage of your grade. Um, this will just enable you to continue to get some credits for your project. And again, we'll help you send emails on via CampusWare, or send to both TA as well as me if you need help. Again, these are all the links that you continue to use it. The Zoom links is same for the class as well as the teaching assistants as well as office hour. I have office hour every Wednesday at 1 p.m. I was there yesterday. So again, just stop by whenever you need it, and let me know, because if nobody shows up, usually I stop it after 30 minutes. But if you send me email that I am expecting you, then I can stay longer. Again, CampusWare, use CampusWare to ask questions. I know that roughly 40 students have already enrolled. If you have not, you'll miss out a lot of information related to announcement. Please do register for that. And if you have difficulty, send me an email, I'll add you. Again, class lecture will be on YouTube. This is the playlist where it will be uploaded. So lecture 1 is already uploaded. Okay, so this is learning assessment questions that you should be able to answer based on what we learned last class. Okay, so I hope you have tried. If you've not, you should try, because this is something related to quiz. So you just have to have it. There is no right or wrong answer, in the sense, I mean, there are wrong answers, but there are multiple answers where, for instance, here I asked, write at least 3 negative impacts. There are many negative impacts of gray infrastructures. So you just have to write 3. So this will help you for your midterms as well as a quiz, because the midterm question will be like this, 2 points for each questions like this. So you should be able to answer them from here. And today's class objective, the very first step before the break, we'll have this many questions that you should be able to answer. First, you should be able to understand what different types of pollutants are present in stormwater and where they come from, and they understand their effect on the receiving water bodies, or even people or plants. Evaluate the cause of concentration variability in stormwater. One thing you'll learn that when somebody says this is the concentration of pollutant in stormwater, that's extremely variable. Based on the pollutant time, it can vary by order of magnitudes. So first thing you have to understand is what's the reason behind it, because that will help you decide what time to samples, because you want to capture the most point so that you will be able to make that management decision. And there are environmental regulations related to concentrations. We'll also discuss that in the first half. Okay, so the first thing, why you need green infrastructure in urban areas? And the very first thing, in many places, it is a flood control measure, means if you use green infrastructures, you will have more infiltrations. More infiltration means less runoff. Runoff means less flooding. Most of the time, green infrastructures are used as a flood control measure. But in urban areas, many pollutants are introduced because of activities by. So that's the reason you should be, most of the time we use it for pollutants. So this is just one publications that measure all different types of organic pollutants. Those are found in stormwater. As you can see, start from on the very top, pharmaceuticals to plant animal sterols, pesticide, pH, polyaromatic hydrocarbons, which is produce combustion of fossil fuels. You have pharmaceuticals, industrial chemicals, household chemicals, almost you name it, all the different types of pollutants are present. These are just organic pollutant, but if you think of what the different pollutants are being monitored, starting from sediments. Sediments means suspended particles that makes the stormwater looks murky or turbid. So turbidity is the way to measure it. So this is what uh, people use as measurement, turbidity. A lot of times people call this total suspended solid, um, TSS, which means total suspended solid. The reason suspended is important is because if it is not suspended, it's very difficult to move them from A to B. So stormwater usually carries suspended sediment for farther distance. That's why people don't just measure any sediments, suspended sediments or solids. So TSS, every time you hear it, just know that this is a solid. Temperature is also a pollutant in the sense that lots of aquatic organisms are designed to or they evolve to live in certain temperatures. And stormwater in urban areas is usually warmer. The reason is it goes above the concrete heat up very quickly. So that's why the stormwater temperature might be higher than what the stream temperature is. So that's also a pollution if the temperature is high because of ecological impact. Then you have salt. Salt comes from many places because of winter season. You add the salt for to remove snow or to melt snow. So those salts will ended up in stormwater. So those places, salt is extremely high pollutions. Then you have nutrient. This is pretty common. Nutrients comes from plants, decaying plants, and animals residues. So if you have let's say animal poops or the leaves, these are the big source of nutrients. Heavy metals, these come from industrial activities. BOD, COD, these are all you learn from CE159. Basically anything that can consume oxygen in water. So those are um, I guess I'll ask Carla to mute that way. Okay, good. All right, so then you have specific organic pollutants. As I said, there are many types. And pathogens or bacteria, viruses, these are also one of the leading cause of stormwater um, impairments. So anytime you think of how different surface water is being impaired by by stormwaters, pathogens are one of the leading cause. Pathogens and mercury. All right, so these are all the listed. I just want to just go over and say which are the concentrations that you have to the limit. So this is the concentrations. If you think of sediments, the source are basically bare land. If you have a construction site, you sediments are one of the biggest pollution. So that's why if you see they use this sweeping or they have a sediment control measure in the locations. You can see that they put this big straw or some kind of sediment captured materials right near the storm drainage. So that's why we can reduce them. But this is the limit. Total solid is 481 to 1 point or 1400 milligram per liters. This is the limit you may expect. And you can see this picture over here. This picture looks turbid. That's why the reason is the suspended solid. Again, the reason why it is important to limit them is first, the suspended solid could carry lots of high concentration of pollutants. Imagine if you have, somebody is driving, the road tires will be, there in those particles. It will be enriched with metals and other stuff, so you don't want them to be in the water. And these are particularly toxic to many communities, means like a fish or things that stay in the mud, they eat these particulates. So that means you wanted to make sure that these are not heavily polluted. Temperature, as I said, we talked about it before. This is just a picture that to show that discharge of stormwater from this particular places is obviously it's not the urban area, it's industrial activities. If your temperature is more than certain amounts, then this will be toxic to the fish or communities there which evolve to live certain areas. So that's why it's very important to control the temperatures. And temperature pollution can also occur because of wastewater. Because if you have wastewater discharge, it has usually warmer temperature than the stream. And so in specific case like where salmon and trouts are breeding, that's the places you don't want to have warmer temperatures. And a lot of times also if you have warm temperature, it has indirect effect. It makes the microbial activities more prominent. So they consume more oxygen that will lead to uh, anoxic conditions where fish dies. Salt we talk about, this is the typical average concentrations. Again, the source could be road salts or natural rock. You can see that in these pictures. These salts are precipitated, and so those are the salt will, no, as you can see, stormwater when it goes through over here, all the salt will be inside that. Then inorganic pollutants, again, salt is also inorganic pollutants, but in the sense we are talking about dissolved pollutants. Here we talk about nutrients and metals. So nutrients are, again, source are decayed biomass. We just saw that here. Any times you see this algal bloom, that's the cause is excess nutrients. This is a really big problems in agriculture active areas like Midwest. That's where like Minnesota or other places where you have lots of farming activities. They apply a lot of fertilizers, so those fertilizers washed up by stormwater. And then also you have natural source like decomposed leaves. So these are the things why it is important. We need to remove the nutrients, and this is one of the hardest things to remove from stormwater. So you could think of a project where you can design a system to remove nutrients from stormwater. Search any news articles related to algal bloom. You'll see many places in Midwestern places. You can see those how to use the stormwater treatment system to remove nutrients. It could be also, anytime it's a place where you have lots of agriculture or warmer area, you are more likely to have this algal bloom. So Mississippi is another place you can think of um, how to design the stormwater treatment system to remove these nutrients. Again, if you have excess nutrients, it has negative impacts. First, algae can grow, as you see this green color. When algae grow, they can also create algal toxin, which is a neurotoxin, so that affects our brain. So that's another thing you have to be careful. And if it is a high concentration of nitrate, that could also affect baby, small baby, because that disrupt the blood's ability to capture oxygen and when they breathe. So if you have too much nitrate, they basically take the space of oxygen. So the oxygen from lungs, it cannot be dissolved in blood. So their brain doesn't get enough oxygen if you have nitrate pollution in their water. This is particularly, for babies that affects their brain is developing, so they get affected more. So that's why it's called blue baby syndromes. That means they don't get enough oxygen. Heavy metals. This is again in Los Angeles. Is one of the biggest lead cause of TMDL violation. TMDL will discuss later. It means that how much total amount of pollutants that can be discharged into a system or surface water per day. Per day. Again, heavy metals comes from industrial activities. Every time you see like metal junkyard, these are the source. Just by driving car, you introduce lead or other pollutants. The common pollutants to find in stormwater is zinc, copper, mercury, lead. Zinc is the most soluble one, so that's why a lot of times if you see what's the leading cause of pollutions, zinc would be one of them. Copper is important. Another nickel is also important. Lead is important, but lead strongly bound to many of the substance, so it's easy to remove them. But still, these are mostly lead can be associated with particulate, not dissolve, suspended particulates. So if you remove suspended particulates, you can remove lots of these metals if they're associated with particulates. So these are all important to understand a little bit so that you know how to design the system. Again, these metals could be dissolved as well as particulates, so you should be able to think of those.
Professor,
Yeah.
when you mentioned concentration in a couple of the previous slides, you're talking about concentration that you typically find in stormwater, right?
Yes.
Okay, and also for the nutrients with nitrate and phosphorus, is it nutrification or nitrification?
Oh, I see. Okay, so there are. We'll talk about that. So did I write somewhere nutrifications? If it is nutrification, that's wrong.
The nutrients slide.
Okay, so um, okay, effect. You're right. This is wrong. Eutrophications. Okay, so eutrophication is algae growing in the systems. Nutrification is, I don't know whether that's the word, but there is nitrifications. Denitrification, we'll learn that. That's the process by which nitrate is changed to another form. Okay.
So wait, so what's the right
Eutrophication,
one? Oh,
eutrophications.
okay.
Yeah, that's a good catch. Any other questions so far? All right, so again, metals has a lot of different pollutions. So you can see this is a, if you search heavy metal stormwater on Google, you'll find lots of articles or Google Scholar or even Google News. You'll see lots of articles related to pollutions. Um, Other pollutants are pH. pH means you learned that in CEE159 is all about how much protons or H plus ion in there. If you have acidic pH, that means it will dissolve lots of metals. If you have basic pH, uh, very rare, but it has other effects. Rarely, it's the acidic pH which is the problems, because that occurs when there is a acid rains. For instance, if you are burning lots of fuel, it produces nitrogen oxide, carbon dioxide. So if you, let's say, fossil fuel burnings, it produces NOx, SOx, COX. No. So the reason I say X means it could be 1, 2, oxygen could be 1, 2. So for instance, COX, it could be carbon monoxide or CO2. SO2 is sulfur dioxide gas. This could be nitrogen oxide, NO2, all those different types of uh, this gas. And now question is why this is important, because if this gas, when they dissolve in water, this produce certain acids. For instance, NOx produce nitric acid. So HNO3 is nitric acid. SOX, it produce sulfuric acid, so H2SO4. For carbon dioxide, it produce carbonic acid, or so that will be H2CO3. So these are all acids. So this is, that's why it called acid rain. Okay, and this is a big issue in sorry, there's many places um, where they have it's gone. Let's see. Hold on. I guess I lost the slides. Okay, here it is. Okay, so acid rain is a big issue in Florida, where if you have low pH, it cannot dissolve the grounds. If your grounds is made of carbonic acid, not carbon, I'm sorry, carbonate rocks. So that carbonate dissolve in acidic water. That's how you can see the sinkhole form in those places. So again, stormwater is the leading cause of that because it's just a non-point source of pollutions. So again, the pH can have other effects. pH can have effects on metal dissolutions. If you have low pH, it can dissolve metals. So that means you will also see high concentration of metals. So these are different pollutions that you can think of. And organic pollutants, this is most of the time on news is because it can have carcinogen effect. So many of the pollutants, organic pollutants. But in a stormwater, a lot of times people measure all these organic carbon as a bulk way as BOD or biochemical oxygen demand or chemical oxygen demand. If you don't know what it is, you should look for um, the the CE159 to get more ideas about this. What that means? But I'll send you the link for that class where you can learn a little bit more about the concept. I'm not expecting you to know everything about it, just the idea of it. Basically, every time organic carbons are there in the world, the natural microorganism will use them as a food and they will consume oxygen. So that means every organic carbon has an oxygen footprint. So that's all is we call oxygen demand. And this is important because if you have lots of organic carbon, these uh, microorganism will deplete oxygen by eating these organic carbons. That means there are less oxygen in water that will cause a noxic zone where fish will die. So that's why it's important to know how much biochemical oxygen demand for stormwater. So that's all about most of the organic carbon. But then there are very micropollutant which doesn't deplete oxygen, but it has harmful effects on us. Many of them are carcinogen. So we discussed that a little bit. It's just the idea there are many types of them. Pesticide, herbicide, all these. And PFAS is the latest kind. They call forever chemicals, means it's a fluorinated organic pollutants. They are present in firefighting foam, the one which used to be used before. Now they are banned because of these issues. So these can be present in stormwater. So many of our projects in our lab is based on how to remove these pollutants. The last one, not the least, is pathogens. Pathogens are acute toxicity, means now if you have, as you can see, in coronavirus is one of them, but these are not present in water as much as in air. But there are some other virus like that cause diarrhea and other disease. Those are present in water. So those there are many types of pathogens. If you are exposed to them, it quickly affects us. We get sick within 24 hours. So that's why it's called acute toxicity because the exposure, even little amount of exposure, can cause disease. So that's why they are very strict, stringent requirement. So the requirement for this kind of pathogens is one per 100 ml. So you cannot have more than one bacteria per 100 mLs in stormwater. That's the permit. Okay. Anytime it goes above it, it's going to be toxic because of the reason that it can grow. It can also cause this toxicity. But pathogens are very difficult to measure. There are many types of pathogens. So that's why the people use indicator organism. It means that if these organisms are present, they are more likely there will be pathogens. So these indicator organisms called toll coliform, E. coli, this you heard about this, enterococci. So these are the indicator organism people use uh, to to indirectly predict whether this has a lot of pathogens or not. So many of the policy or the regulation is based on this indicator organism, not actual pathogens. So that's the key differences. So that's all for pollutants. I hope that you learn from these effects, what are those pollutants, what it causes. So next, why is this important? Because if you work in a consulting agency and you were asked to investigate if at a location what's the type of pollutions, you should think of what are the source, what should what should be expected. For instance, if you are asked to check in a area which is very rural area, it doesn't have much industrial activities, that means you can expect pretty rare, rarely you'll find metals pollutions. But in rural area, you might find something more like a nutrients, because there will be plants and other things that could decompose based on what is there. So those are the things you can expect. So that's why it is important. And second thing is, as I said, there are reasons why things will vary a lot. So if you see, this is the effect depends on different types of pollutions. So let's think of all the pollutants on here. If you have, let's say, you dump all these pollutant into stormwater, or there is a source, the effects could be last for many few days to many years. One of the things, for instance, let's say nutrients. Nutrients, once it is there, it takes about a year or 10 years to for the effects to go away. Because nutrients is still there, being used, and that will produce another nutrients because bacteria will consume and they will also die. So these nutrients will continue to be cycling within the system. That's why you see this is a long-term effect. Okay, so if you have nutrients, it has the effect or nutrifications could be felt between 1 month to all the way for many years. But if you think of pathogens, which is opposite side of it, their effect is within a day. Okay, the reason is it depends on their lifetime. So if you have bacterial pollutions, the moment you have sunlight, it will kill many of the pathogens. So that means if you have a stormwater is exposed to sunlight, within next few days it's all going to be dead. So that will not be a problem unless there is a way to block the sunlight. For instance, if you have a lot of particulates that block the sunlight, so that means that the effect is diminished. The bacterial pollution might last for a little longer than day. But again, your goal is to find out what's the reason. Okay, so again, same thing, heavy metal toxicity. You see that it could be based on types of metal, the toxicity can be felt within a day, but mostly these are long-term impact. Okay, you not see the lead pollution very quickly. Suspended solids, again, the effect could be last between 1 day to a couple of months because it takes time to settle down. So that means now you will see those effects few days. BOD, again, any type of hydraulic effects means whether this thing is moving faster or slower, it's very quick, short life. So these pictures basically says if you have a pollution, how long the effect will last. Okay, and the effects is written here, and that's because whatever time it takes to for things to work. And these are different processes. On the right side, you see these different processes are there, sedimentations, all that. It says how long it takes. So for instance, sedimentations, it takes about few hours for things to to settle. And if you see bacteria die off, it's around a day. That's why you see this one. The effect is around 24 hours. So you can use these two pictures to understand the impact of different nutrients. Any question? All right. So I want you guys to read these questions. This is like a quiz question, so you're not going to. Um, I'm not evaluating you here. You just can answer anything, based on what you think. So think about this question for 20 seconds, then I'll pose these questions. So let's see. Okay, so I now put the question. Um, Identify the type of pollutant you would expect in the site. So this is a site, you can see this is a railroad site. So that means industrial. What are the different things you may find? Most likelihood. So I'll close the poll in 10 seconds. Okay, so let me end the poll. Okay, so let me share the results. This is what you answer. So 98% students chose number C. Any volunteers why you chose number C? Any one volunteers? Again, it could be anything. Nutrients would be present too. Pathogens could be, but metals are more likely. That's the correct answer because you have. I see the chart window, so let me see. So combustion of coal. So if there is a coal power plant, yes, coal will produce. Most time, coal produce mercury. They may have some arsenic, but I think the biggest reason here is if you see it says railroad sites, okay, with business centers. So these are basically industrial sites. Industrial site produce. I mean railroad. Think of it's cause of metals. So all the materials used over there would have metals. So that's one of the reason. And again, let's see why pathogens and nutrients may not be the cause. As you can see over here, the source of nutrients are plants or green space. That's where the plants are, or if people apply fertilizers or nutrients there. But you don't see, the people don't maintain this grassy area here. So that means you're not less likely to find nutrients. Pathogens, again, if you have chicken poops or dog poops or cat poops, these are the source of pathogens. Obviously, human is not going to go there and poop there, so that's a assumption. Otherwise, where the pathogens will come, the bare surface, they will die if even a little bit there. So that's why the A and B are less likely the answers. So MSA, machinery, and metals that might be subject to dissolve acidic rains, yes. So again, the most of the materials you see over these sites are metals. That's the reason. And so this is very important thinking. When you choose a site, you got to think of what are the pollutants you may expect. That's how you can design your stormwater treatment system. And you may see over here, you may not notice here. This is, what is this? This waterways. So this is the railroad area, so this is the polluted site, and this is LA River. Okay, so that means all the stormwater is drained into that LA rivers and disposed into ocean. So LA River has this TMDL or impairment, what the pollutants are. So metal is one of them, and you can see what's the reason behind it. All right, so now we learned that these are different pollutants are present. So the next thing is what we can do about it. Now, if you have all these pollutants, it will cause all the effect. How to minimize these pollutions? So that's why you have regulations, ordinance to limit those pollutions. And you have to understand stormwater is a non-point source pollution. So if you think of stormwater is the source, and this is called non-point source. Non-point source means, or another way to call is a diffused source. What it means that the pollutants could be many different places. You cannot pinpoint this is the source of the pollutions. And this is usually stormwater, because stormwater comes from many different areas. Uh, if you think of LA River water, you cannot say, where this water is coming from. It comes from many different places. So that's why you call non-point source. Point source means a specific site, like a wastewater treatment plant is a point source. Industrial sites with which releasing water is a point source. And point source are very easy to manage because you know where the source are. You can design a system to remove those pollutants. Non-point source, you cannot design the entire world. So that's why these stormwater treatment systems are very effective in dealing with this non-point source because you are just creating a natural garden to remove pollutants. So there is one regulation that is important for stormwater control measure. That's 1972. It's called Clean Water Act. 303D, impair water and total maximum daily loads. These are the links. You all should go to this link so that you learn more about it because I don't really discuss it in details, but you need that for your project. So TMDL is a total maximum daily load. We'll discuss that. It means that how much total amount of pollutant can be discharged into a system without impairing them for intended use. So this website, if you go there, if you click any of them, there is you can click any locations, any waterways. Let's say a big pond or lake near your home. You can write the name and it will go to there and it will know what's the TMDL for that particular water bodies. But I checked yesterday and what I found is that this website is showing error. It means it says that this is not private. If you go click that one, your data or information might be shared, or it's just the problem with APS sites. They probably have not updated it. So that's why it's your choice if you want to go. I tried it, but I don't recommend that we should do it. Before they used to have it, no problem. So it will take some time for them to fix it. At least the one where you find the TMDL, not everywhere. Okay. Um, so so this is the link. This link may not work. Check, but may show error um, before it is used to work. Okay, so this maybe they're updating all that. So what is TMDL? This is very important because that's the regulations. So let's think of who does it and how it is done. So number one question, there'll be a one question on quiz on TMDL. So you should know what that means. So TMDL means what's the total amount of any pollutants that you can discharge into a river or lake uh, without impairing it. And then once you know the TMDL, you can see that whether the stormwater is discharging that much pollutant per day or not. If yes, or if it exceeding TMDL, you have to use stormwater treatment systems upstream to minimize that pollutions. And TMDL could vary for pollutant to pollutants because again, it's driven by effect. Okay, so what is the TMDL for zinc at one location? This could be very different for TMDL at another location for zinc. The reason is, what's the end goal? For instance, if you think of Lake Tahoe, that one is used for drinking water by the community there. So that means you will have much more strict TMDL because you don't want people to drink water with a zinc. So that means the TMDL at that location will be very, very strict at very small amount. Whereas let's say there is another lake, let's say Bayona Creek or Bayona wetland, we are not drinking for that water. That is just for nature. So because we are not drinking it, you are allowed to put a little bit more pollutants. So it's all depends on what's the intended use and who make those TMDL. It's important. It's not EPA. Okay, EPA approve it, but EPA is not making those rules. What is the state agency's responsibility to? So it's issued by state or local agency. For instance, Bayana Creek, LA. LA County will make that one. Okay, so it's state will uh, ask the municipal authority or the local agency to produce TMDL. They will revise it and they will submit to EPA, and then EPA will approve it. So that's a key question here. A lot of times in quiz we ask who is the person who approved TMDL, then it's the EPA. But who make the TMDL, who make the decision was the TMDL should be the state agency, not EPA. Okay, so that's again, you should go to these links so that you should able to see those. A lot of times you see that NPDES permit. This is important for many municipal system or the norm. So that's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. So whenever you heard this word NPDES, this is the full form, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. Okay, so this is more for the stormwater. For instance, Caltron, California Transportation Agency, they have these big roadways and they produce lots of pollutant because people drive on it. So they'll have to get NPDES permit because they produce stormwater runoff which has pollution. But if it's municipal agency like LA County, they've called MS4 permit. Okay, so just the difference, the way it works. When you see MS, that's municipality. Okay, and NPDES, that's not municipality. That's like a more like a diffuse source, other places. So these are all means not total daily maximum daily load. So there are ways you will learn how to calculate it. We'll discuss that a little bit later. But then there are local ordinance in Los Angeles. So these are different ordinance, stormwater ordinance. It prohibits the entry of illicit discharge into municipal storm drainage systems. That means you cannot dump things into the storm drainage from your properties. So let's say you wash car and you have a lot of pollutions, not car wash, but let's say you spill oil or you have some chemicals. You cannot just discharge into storm drainage without permit. And then there is low impact development ordinance, which is recent 2011, not recent anymore, 10 years ago. What it means that it try to minimize the amount of impervious surface. So if you are designing a new, let's say you are having a new development, for instance, if you build these big buildings nowadays around it, that means those are impervious surface. So now if they are produced, they are removing some kind of green space, they have to account for that by their design. That means they have to make all these other um, stormwater infrastructures to account for those loss of green space. So this is basically low impact development. But more recently, it's a parcel tax, which I talk about, a Measure W, which is passed 2 years ago. It we pay tax 2.5 cents per square feet of impervious surface. That lead to 300 millions of dollars every year for stormwater management. You can go to this link. It will tell you what it does. The reason it's important is if you are from LA, there are lots of investment in stormwater areas. So this is a good time to learn more about stormwater management for future job applications. So that's why I say emphasize that you can use this project for your interview when you go for internship or interview after this class. You can talk about it from now on that you are working on a project. And there are other ordinance, and I just list them here. If you want to know more about it, just you should go and find it. And the reason why it's important, in interview, they will ask these questions. If you're applying for a stormwater treatment system or job, you should know what the ordinance are. Just name, what it does, just a broad idea so that they know what is green building ordinance, what is landscape ordinance, what it does. So you should click on those and go there so that you know that before the interview. All right, so that's the first half. We learned a lot of different things, but these are the 5 questions you should be able to answer. Write 5 types of pollutants, list 2 water quality parameters that change in short terms after a storm events. So I just know that pathogen is one of them because it comes within 24 hours. Suspended solid is could be. There are things that doesn't change. It takes long time. Let's say nitrification, that takes longer. So you should check all those, go back and if you don't understand many of these questions, go back and answer them. These are important for your midterms and quiz. That's why I say I list the question again. All right, so we'll have a break for 10 minutes. After that, we'll back and we'll discuss about um, more about how to sample stormwater and how to calculate TMDL. So I'm going to see any chat window, anything. Yes, Kathy, talk about LA River, yes. All right, so let's meet at 5 or 10, 5:10. It's now 4:57. I'll see you then. You can take a break or bring your dinners or whatever you want to eat during class. I'll see you in 10 minutes. I'll pause the. All right, so this is the second half. Before the break, we learned about different types of pollutants and where you should expect them. Now it's about sampling, because if you are going to work in a stormwater consulting industry, you are going to go for sampling. So it's important to know where to samples, how to sample it, how to store them, because if you store wrong way, your data will be very different from the right way. And so in this next 20 minutes, you'll learn how to store stormwater samples for different contaminants and how to take samples, or how your sampling method can influence the concentrations. Because these are all related to TMDL, so that's why it's important to know those. Let me see. Okay, so these are the learning assessment question. By end of this session, you should be able to answer these questions. Different. Just be familiar with that. All right, so stormwater sampling and handling to measure the pollutants. Again, just to remind, we are talking about these pollutants: sediment, temperature, salt, salinity, nutrients, heavy metals, BOD, organic pollutants, pathogens. Okay, so you learn about how your sampling method could influence these results. Of course, temperature, you cannot take the samples and store at home and measure temperature, it will change. So that means you have to do in situ. Everything else, you will not be able to measure at the locations. pH, you'll be able to measure. There are pH probe you can dip in, it can measure pH, salinity. So there are a couple of things, I'll write it here: pH, salinity. In fact, you can measure turbidity, um, temperatures. These are, you can measure in situ. Okay, in situ means you can take the probe and dip inside the stormwater and you will be able to get it immediately. So you don't have to wait for another time to measure. Everything else, you have to measure at, you need specific tools to measure it. So that means those has to send to lab and measurement has to be done there. So how you store it, how do you transport them, what's a container, how you collect samples, all are going to influence your result. Because your aim is to know what pollutants, it's important to know how your method is influencing your result. And this is monitoring is a big component of the stormwater treatment system. So you should know how monitoring means, taking samples and measure those concentrations. It's expensive, it's time consuming. That's why a lot of times, very rarely people report this. Most time, if you install a green infrastructures, you just have to monitor within the first year. After that, you don't have requirement because it's so expensive to monitor, because you have to pay somebody. It's a human time cost. So one thing I want you guys to remember, that concentration of pollutants is event based. Means every time there is a rainfall, you are going there. It's not like a continuous system. So that means what type of rainfall, how long it has been rained, um, how often it rains at locations, are all going to be a factor into the concentrations. So that's why the concentration is unpredictable. It depends on local climate. It depends on where the source are. Are you collecting sample at the location which collect all the entire locations or not? It also varies based on the pollutant types. The concentration can vary widely. Most importantly, you have to think of what you can control, because things like climate you cannot control. Things like point source, non-point source, you cannot control. But what you can control is the location where you want to take samples from and what time you want to take samples, because those two are going to affect the concentrations. So that's what you are going to understand now. And so one of the things you learn in this class, I'm just going to give you a very brief idea before. If you have x-axis is time, okay, and y-axis is response or the parameters that you are measuring. Let's say you are measuring flow rate. So let's say you have rainfall happens now, and I'm just going to draw rainfall amount. Very simplistic design. Let's say you have 1 inch of rainfall and happens for, let's say this is 1 hour. Okay. So your rainfall happens 1 inch. This is 1 inch rainfall per entire 1 hour. So this is your rainfall happens. Okay. So I just graphically draw it. So let's say you are going to measure the flow rate at certain locations in the downstream where all the water drain into that locations. Think of it as simple as your rooftop. Your rooftop is your collection area, and you are collecting water at the end where all the rooftop water is coming into. So if you see the flow rate, initially there will be very small flow rate because it takes some time for things to fill up. So you might see the flow rate will have a very different patterns. This could be like, okay, I'm just throwing a number. It's not necessarily that, but every water side of the catchment area has its own characteristic. We'll learn about what influence it, but just know this is a flow rate. Okay, it could be this, or it could be like it could be like longer before it maximum flow rate and goes like this. Um, So what you want to do is you know that the flow rate could vary. At initially, it will be very small amount of flow rate. So that means all the pollutants are concentrated because that all the pollutants are washed up initially. So that's why if you do concentration profile or the pollutant profile, you will see a very different color. So let's say the red one is the concentrations. Okay, so this is pollutants. So that means the pollutant concentration will peak much before than the flow peaks. The reason is most of the pollutants are washed up in the initial time. So once it's like being washed up, there is no continuous source of pollutant. That's why pollutant peaks are always before the water peak or flow peak. This is one of the quiz questions, so midterm question. So you should know what's the reason behind it. But point is, here what you learn that the concentration could vary very differently. So imagine you are taking sample here versus here. So this is you, this is your, let's say team A. Team A take the sample, this is team B. And let's say this is team C. Okay, this is team A means you will say, okay, this is the concentrations. If team B, they say this is the concentrations. If somebody take the sample at these locations, this is the concentrations. This is the time. So as you see, based on what time you decide to take a sample, you may get very different results. So that's why it's very difficult to know who is right because everybody is right. So that's the reason people don't take snap. This is a grab sample. Means you grab a sample at certain time, you say this is the number. Graph samples are not very consistent because of this reason. So a lot of times in the regulations, what they ask you to do is take sample at different time at the same location so that you can take average of them so that you will be able to know the number. So it's a composite sample. So you learn about graph sample versus composite sample, and this is the reason behind it. So second thing, as I said, that's determine the frequency, how quickly you take samples. So the frequency is single versus composite. Composite samples are more accurate or more representative of a TMDL. Single samples can be skewed. That's not necessarily a reflection of the rule amount of pollutants. But high frequency sample is very difficult because imagine you are standing on the rain and waiting there for all the time. So that's why there are auto sampler, as you can see in this picture over here. This is auto sampler. It basically it has a pump. It collects sample at different time and store it. and later you can take those samples and put them in the container. And the left side is a grab sample. It's called grab sample because you grab a bottle and just measure it whatever time you want. Okay, and the sample location is important because if you are taking downstream, you'll get more pollutions. If you are taking upstream, you get less pollutions. So that's why it's important to know which the downstream, what location is. So this is just you can check was this YouTube video so that you see how the sample is done real world. Okay, and monitoring guidance is there from the EPA website. Again, these are all important if you are planning to work in a consulting company. I should know those details. Um, so I'm just going to tell you the principle behind it. So again, sampling time is critical. We just explained a little bit earlier. Pollutant peaks or always appear before the peak for the discharge. The reason is pollutants are washed up initially in the rainfall, and as the rainfall proceeds, it becomes diluted and diluted. So the concentration will decrease because the source is finite. Okay, so I'm just going to write source of pollutant is finite, usually washed off orally. Then if you wait longer, it become diluted. Okay, so that's why the concentration decreases. So that's why it's called first plus. First plus means the very first, when there is a rainfall, the very first time when you see the content concentration, that is going to be very high. So as you see over here, this is the real data in actually in LA, Getty Center in 2000. So this is done by Professor Mike Stenstrom in our department. So this is his data. As you can see, this is the rainfall data. This is rainfall. Um, and this is the discharge rate, but this is pollutant. Okay. So as you can see, um, actually these are all pollutants. So this is flow rate. This is flow rate. Okay. So as you see, the most of the pollutants appear within the first 2 hours. That this is the flow rate started in the. You see this over here. This is the time um, most of the pollutant shows up. And so that's the reason, again, the small volume, more pollutant washed up initially. Later you have high volume, but there are not enough pollutant remaining. So the concentration is diluted or decreased. Um, so these are different sampling method. I talk about it, just watch the YouTube video so that you know. Again, it's a grab sample versus automated sampler. The difference is it's a composite samples. You can also stand there and take multiple samples that become also a composite sample. That's something you have to do. These are the few things you have to remember. So this is a very important slide for your quiz, is how do you handle the samples? Because that depends, that will influence your concentration. Uh, it will change the concentrations. So I'll explain what's the reason behind it. Okay, so you have, as I said, no pH, all these things you can measure immediately. Couple of things you may not be able to measure is a lot of times, let's say, stored suspended solid, you don't measure it, or turbidity, or particle size distributions. This is something important because very fine particles migrate further. Nutrients, metals, and organic. Okay. So let's say you have all these. Okay. And how you make those sample handling will influence your concentration. So I'll tell you what's the reason behind it. So first is you have to pre-clean the container, because your container may have some pollutants. So if you are, and there are ways to do it. For instance, if you have heavy metals, you usually acid wash it. The reason is um, if you lower the pH, all the metals will be dissolved. So that's why if you put acid in the container and like very acidic water and or concentrated acid and rinse it, any metals, residual metals from the wall will be dissolved. And then you wash it multiple times. So that way you can get rid of any residual amount. If you use organic pollutants, then you can put some methanol so that it dissolves the organic pollutants from the container and you wash them out. For pathogens, you don't put acid because it will kill the pathogens, right? So you don't want to do anything other than just wash with regular water. But for pathogens, you want to store them at 4 degrees Celsius or is ice water. The reason is pathogens can grow or they can die. If it is a low temperature, they don't die. Okay, so at least they don't grow. So that means the concentration remain the same. So this is why the storage has to be always cool temperatures, so that to prevent um, growth or die off. Because a lot of times if you have warmer temperature, they also die. So that's the reason. So when you take samples, you have to store them in freezer or refrigerator, um, to so that they remain the same until you measure it. And usually within 24 hours you have to measure it. Organic pollutants, you typically take sample in glass container because if you take plastic, it will stick onto the wall. So that's why you use glass container so that non-sticky to organic. That's why not plastic. Metals, to plastic is okay as long as you acid washed it, and usually they use plastics. And the another thing is filters or not. If you are measuring particle size distributions, you do not filter because you are going to remove particulates. Same thing if you are measuring heavy metals, you do not filter because there are particulates that can have metals. So if you filter them, you're removing the total amount concentrations. So anytime you are measuring total concentrations, not dissolved, you do not want to filter it. Okay, so that's one key things you have to remember. So if you filter, then it become dissolved. We are measuring filter. So filter is basically 0.45 micrometers filter size people use to define dissolve, but that can be also variable separation definitions. Okay, so what I did explain, I just want to repeat quickly. For storage, as you see, for nutrients, you can acidify to remove bacteria so that bacteria will not consume the nutrients during the storage. That's why you add a little bit of acid, HCl. You do not add nitric acid. Again, this is something a lot of grad students make mistake. If you add nitric acid, think of this what you are doing. You are adding nitrate. Nitrate is a nutrients. Okay, so you are changing the nitrate concentration. So it increase.
Professor,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask in the previous slide, what do you mean by headspace or no headspace? It's just that volatile pollutants might
Yes.
like go into gaseous form, right?
Yes, exactly. So
Okay.
I skip that one. Okay, that's a good point. So if you have, when you take stormwater sample, usually you put deep the entire, what you do is you have a graph sample, let's say. You take the entire container, you take some water and pour it outside so that you don't discard it. So your wall is, everything is washed off with the same water. And then you take the real stormwater, pour inside it and close it inside while it is inside completely saturated, submerged, you close the cap. That way there is no head space, and that will prevent any kind of volatile pollutants to escape from the water. If you have head space, it will always tends to diffuse, and then when you open the container, it's all gone, right? So that's the reason you want to use it.
So volatile pollutants is no headspace.
Yes,
Okay.
but no head space. Again, heavy metal, acid was plastic bottle, so that it remove residual metals from container. Okay. So again, storage, you have to store them for nutrients, you acidify so that you remove. So think of the reason behind storage is if your storage change the concentration, that's the wrong storage. So you have to think critically or think conceptually why your storage method is influencing it. Then you can answer this question. So nutrients, think of what happens to nutrients if you store it. There is only one way nutrients can be removed from the system is if somebody is eating them. and the things that can eat is bacteria. So if you want to measure the nutrient concentration, you add acidified. So if you add more acid, the pH will be lower, the bacteria inactivated. So they will not be using them anymore, or they will not grow in the system. Another way is you can filter the water, but if you filter it, you can also remove total particulate nutrients. So you don't want to do that. That's why people add the HCl or hydrochloric acid to um, minimize the bacterial growth. Pathogens, your storage, bacteria can grow. So that's why it's important, or die. That's why it's important to put them in a cooler and measure within 6 hours. If it's above 6 hours, it results in validated. So that's why it has to be measured very quickly within the 6 hours of taking samples. Dissolve organic, because you are measuring dissolve, you can filter them, that remove all the bacteria. You can store in refrigerator for a long time. Okay, so unless it's degrade, very quickly, very rarely. So that means you can store for a week uh, before analysis or within a week. If you are doing particle size, you have to measure within 2 to 4 hours. The reason is particle size can coagulate, they can stick with each other, and the distribution will change. So that's why it's very important to analyze it. If you store it, just make sure that you shake well to disaggregate them. So that's the reason. Again, just know the reason behind why the storage influence it. Again, this is just the last few slides about how do you measure the concentrations. As I said, you take graph samples, but graph samples are not a true reflection of the concentration. So what people do is they take sample at different time. So if you take different time, this is I is event. Okay. So you take sample, first sample, that's I equal to 1. Take second sample, I equal to 2. So you have certain amount of volume. So what you do is if you measure the mass of the concentration, mass of pollutants, and you take many samples, so this will be concentrations time volume of samples, the graph samples, divided by total volume. Okay. So this is the mass of pollutant in entire samples. It's the same concept. Concentration event based means if you take sample at different time, because you are not really, the flow rate change with time. It's not like the constant flow rate. That's why you have to also measure the flow rate at the stream. So if you know the stream flow rate, you just plug this value, then you get this total amount. So that's basically it's a concentration times the flow rate divided by flow rate. So flow rate cancel out. You get a mean concentrations. Okay, so that's why it's called event mean concentrations. Because as I said, the concentration vary a lot. So how do you know what's the real number? This is where you can get out of that. You take a lot of samples and then you take the event mean concentrations. TMDL, this is the last sample. I want to just mention that you should go to this website. TMDL means, it could be because of the point source and non-point source and some margin of safety. So LA means background load allocations. Load allocation means this is the non-point source. Naturally, you have some pollutant always coming in the stormwater. And this waste load allocation means if you know exact locations, you know how much they are discharging. Let's say UCLA discharge certain amount of water all the time to the swales or the stormwater. Then you know how much pollutant you might expect in their locations. When you add them together, that's called TMDL. Again, this is basically how much total pollutants can be discharged or discharged into the system daily. Okay, it's not monthly, so daily. Um, this is again calculate the total load versus compare with TMDL. Total load means you concentration times volume. Um, so again, this is a link that you should follow, and this may not work. Just check that one. This will work. These two links I check works. Uh, but the location where you can find the TMDL for any water bodies in US, it may not work because the system is they did something that there is a privacy concern. If that's the case, you don't have to go there. So that's all for the site, but let's have a quiz question just so that how much we learn. So generic poll, um, this is the question. The question is the peak of pollutant concentration comes after the peak in the discharge rate. Is this a true or a false sentence statement? So imagine you have a rainfall. Is this pollutant or this is discharge? So I'm talking about pollutant concentrations. Another is pollutant peak. Another is water peak. Pollutograph, hydrograph. This is we call. Okay, I'll close the poll in 10 seconds. So you can decide whatever you like. Uh, Again, this is just for your learning assessment. I'm not really, there's no way for me to know who answer what. I also don't need to know. All right, so end the poll, share the results. 87% students choose false, and that's correct answers. The reason is, as I said, pollutant concentrations will be peak initially because most of the pollutants are washed up initially. Okay, you have less fluoride initially, and then you have high pollutant amount. So the concentration become very high because the volume is low, mass is high. But as you have more and more water coming in, your already some pollutants are washed off by that time. So your mass of the pollutant remaining is low, but your volume is increasing. So that means your concentration is decreasing. So that's why this is pollutant peak initially, and this is a discharge or the stormwater peak later comes later. So this is a false statement. All right, so you should be able to answer these questions based on what we learn the sampling method, all that. Most importantly, why, how you store the samples. Now, those are the quiz questions. So next class, we'll learn how to use mass balance to calculate concentrations at different stormwater systems. So the mass balance concept, I'm not going to go through again, because this is something you learn in CEE159. So what I did is I put this class, the link. So you should watch them so that you become familiar. It's exact similar concept here. So if you already know it's in CEE159, you don't use this as a practice. If you do not know, you just I'll just solve some questions so that you know how to solve it. But I'll not go details about it, so you can watch them here. So that's all for the class today. So what we are going to do next is obviously you can leave if you want to, but if you have not made a group, well, let's discuss about it. So I'm going to stop share. Um, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some last year report, okay, so that you know how they look. But this, by no means this is the best report. I'm just showing some examples. So for instance, here, if you see, this is the report by 4 students, 4 or 5 students, depends on how, that time I didn't have this many students, so that's why the limit was 4. But now because we have 80 students, I don't want to have more than 10 or 12 projects. So that's why I limit to 8 maximum students or minimum 6. So you see, this is it has to be 10 page. They have a table of content. They have abstract. This is, again, we have the template, so you should see those. I'll share some of the example. Again, they did literature review. They cite some paper. They'll talk about what is there. Then they use Bolter Hall as a case study to see how they can design the green roof or system to treat stormwater at these locations. So they calculate the rainfall amount in that area, and then they do all these calculations. Again, will help you. Okay, so this is just so that you know how they did different stuff, and then they have a conclusion. You see, there are not a lot of graph because they didn't do it. But again, every year now the TA is here, and TA is going to help you. So I expect this to be much more better quality. And you are also 8 students or more students. I'm going to show you another example. Um, so again, there's a site. They have a site. They talk about the where the water drains, what's the soil type, and based on the soil type, they know how much infiltration it can happen. Based on that, they design the drainage systems, rainfall characteristic. They do some calculations. Again, they talk about how they can design it. Okay, and this is just example. They're not doing this one. It's just example at different locations. People do it, so they talk about how they are going to design the rainwater capture system. Rain garden, where they are going to put the rain garden at what location, what's the reason behind it. Um, so you see, these are different things they can talk about, and this is more qualitative. They have educational community benefit, so they discuss about what's the outreach over there. So it could be many different ways, and they do have all these tables and calculations. Um, and I also send you an emails about if many of you want to extend their projects to publications. Obviously, will help you guys for doing that one. I got some response from students. And again, this is not requirement. You don't need to do it. If you know, this is by no because extra work for you. You just your primary goal is to do well in this class. If you feel like you have enough time and you want interested in to do this thing for the various reason, then you should say yes. If not, then don't worry about it. No, this is not worth it for many of you because I know this is in a COVID time. You'll be busy on so many things. Don't take another responsibility unless it's required. Okay, but this is a service service or opportunity that we like to provide you because I know that its implication is very high. So I got at least few students um, saying yes. What that means that we have already known some projects or some kind of review which is already there is a need for it. So we'll tell you these concept or the topics, and then your goal is to choose one of those topics, and you can work on that one. And I'm going to explain one of the topics that Renette. Renette, you want to talk a little bit more about your research or interest? Renette is a PhD student in our department, and she is interested in compost, and for many different reasons. First reason is compost as a resource, so that you don't have to use them or produce waste. So she was telling me a little bit more about the story in Long Beach. So Renette, you want to talk a little bit about? Then I'll tell you what is that project is going to become.
Sure. So I work with a local food policy council. I run a compost and food waste working group. There's some legislation that's coming up in California called SB 1383 that's goaled at reducing short lived climate pollutants. And as a stipulation for that, every city in California is going to have organic waste disposal service for every resident and business. In Long Beach, they're looking at using an anaerobic digester, but we're trying to advocate for community compost projects and larger industrial compost projects for the use in the city. So, like the waste becomes soil that stays to benefit Long Beach. So, that will kind of be the foundation for where we go with research. I did talk to somebody from the Office of Sustainability today, and they gave me some ideas and things that we can work with. So, if anybody's interested in compost, reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat.
And also, I'll tell you what's obviously there are two aspects of this project. One is how to produce compost. That's not the focus of this class. What I thought you could work on as a green infrastructure is 90% of the stormwater treatment system require amendments, which is either compost or organic amendments, because organic amendments provide the nutrients for the plant to survive. But now, if you see the compost, if you add compost, compost can also produce nutrients. Okay, because that's the whole reason you are adding them. So a lot of places you don't need to add compost because of that reason. If the nutrients is a problem, so compost some other time can remove some metals. Many heavy metals are removed by compost, but they are not 100% like foolproof. Compost will decay over time. So anything absorbed by organic as a metals will also dissolve some point. So you are not really solving for long term. You are solving for short term, and then it will some point will come out. But there are places where compost is extremely beneficial. For instance, organic pollutant degradations. Natural microorganisms degrade pollutants. If you add compost, they will become more active, so they will degrade a lot of pollutants. So And then compost has positive, negative effects. There are a lot of other aspects of it. So a lot of people don't understand where compost will be useful versus where it's not. Okay. And if it is useful, how long it will survive or how long it will last, that usefulness will last. And how do you even decide which compost to use? Because Rennet can tell you all compost are not same, they're all different. How do you even know which compost is what, right? So how people measure it, how they make decision. So these are a lot of these questions. Those are important for stormwater manager. So my thought was for Rennet to use these projects as a launching pad for asking those questions and doing literature review on those. And hopefully that will be helpful for the stormwater manager to make the decision on using compost. So as I said, this is just one example. We have lots of ideas like that. So if more of you are interested, we'll break into two groups. If it's one, let's say we have 8 students, obviously we'll have one project because Renat has already worked on it. So my focus will be helping her in that project. But again, it's not like we'll work with them. They will work exactly like how you guys working, but it's only after summer we'll work with them independently to make these publications, because we don't want to work with them during the class because that's giving them extra help compared to other people. So we don't do that one. We'll just give instructions the same way as we do other. So that's why I said if you want to work on this one, contact Rennet. And also, this is not required. You don't have to. It's a lot of work in the summer, but it's a benefit is that it will be a publication at some point, and then your name will be there. But let's say you join and you didn't contribute at the end, we'll just put you in the acknowledgement saying that you have contributed initially. So it's not like it's not your signing will hold you accountable all the time. Okay, things happens. But just don't commit to this one unless you really know that you are interested or you will have time to work on it. All right, so that's all. Uh, Use GroupMe to find your group by next Tuesday. I wanted to have at least all the group formed, whether 3 members, 4 members, doesn't matter, but form your group. And on campus where you write, this is our group, and write the name so that at least I know which group need more students. That way, if somebody doesn't have a group, then I'll just direct to them, to you. Okay. All right, so see you next week. I'm going to stop recording, but I'll stick around if you have any question.